If it's Thursday, they long to be close to you. Ballooning fears over China as lawmakers hold hearings and receive classified briefings amid new details about the size and scope of China's aerial surveillance program. Plus, Turkey's president is calling it the disaster of the century as the death toll from Monday's earthquake tops 20,000, leaving millions more in need of humanitarian aid. And time is running out for rescuers. And promises. President Biden and the Republican Party's top presidential contenders are all in Florida today as the White House clashes with the GOP on entitlements and spending. Welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd reporting from Washington, where U.S. officials have spent much of the day trying to tamp down growing concerns from lawmakers amid new revelations about China's massive balloon surveillance operation. And that's the news here. This is an operation, and it's much bigger than I think a lot of people thought. It has been a day of hearings, briefings, and questions. There's some new intelligence, even some unanimous condemnation. According to a senior State Department official, photos taken during a high-altitude flyby show the Chinese spy balloon that was shot down over the weekend was equipped with multiple antennas capable of conducting what is called signals intelligence operations. And that means it was capable of eavesdropping on things like phone communications. So this is almost their version of the NSA. In two Senate hearings today with top Pentagon and State Department officials, lawmakers from both sides of the aisle voiced their alarm and concern. Democratic Senator John Tester of Montana, the state that the balloon was first spotted in, pressed officials today on whether or not the government knows for sure what intelligence China was trying to collect, and he did not seem pleased at all with their answers.
The truth is, we think we know what they were going to collect. We don't know. That scares the hell out of me. Because quite frankly, I'll just tell you, I don't want a damn balloon going across the United States when we potentially could have taken it down over the Aleutian Islands. I got a problem with a Chinese balloon flying over my state, much less the rest of the country.
Today, we also learned that multiple FBI offices, including its counterintelligence division, have been brought in to help the government's investigation and analysis of this high-altitude balloon. Senior FBI officials told reporters that this is the first time the agency has ever conducted an investigation of this kind. Sort of implies that the intelligence community is admitting that perhaps this one literally flew under the radar. And after numerous requests to the White House, lawmakers in both chambers received classified briefings today. And as you might expect, Democrats emerged from those briefings largely saying they think the administration handled the matter appropriately. Republicans emerged from the same briefings vehemently disagreeing.
Everything I learned today confirms that the administration made the right decision.
We haven't learned anything more than what everyone always knew. China sent a spy balloon to fly all across America. The Biden administration had a chance to shoot it down over Alaska, and they chose to let it spy all across America. End of story.
But there is agreement about condemning China. The House unanimously passed a resolution denouncing China's behavior, calling it, quote, brazen violation of United States sovereignty. Folks, as the U.S. continues to recover and analyze the debris from this balloon, fundamental questions do remain about exactly what China was trying to learn and why, and how the administration is going to respond, but also, frankly, how is it that we didn't really have an idea of how extensive this program was until now? Meanwhile, the Deputy Secretary of State, Wendy Sherman, testified today about China's growing aggression towards the United States and amid concerns of a potential U.S.-China military confrontation brewing over Taiwan.
This irresponsible act put on full display what we've long recognized, that the PRC has become more repressive at home and more aggressive abroad. We may remain committed to our long-standing one China policy and oppose any unilateral changes to the cross-strait status quo. Our policy has not changed. What has changed is Beijing's growing coercion.
All right, let's dig into what more we learned today. Joining me is NBC News Capitol Hill correspondent Ali Vitale and also NBC News' global security reporter Dan DeLuce. So, Ali, let's start with all these briefings today. Who are the, I know there was State, Pentagon, and I think D-N.Y. Was participating in these briefings. How long were they? Was it the same group of people doing all of them? Give me some details on this.
Yeah, Chuck, a lot of overlap between who was doing the briefing, but one of the key voices there was, of course, Wendy Sherman, who you just saw speaking about this larger operation, what it means in the larger geopolitical landscape in terms of what China is doing both at home and abroad. But look, all of these hearings, they started, the first briefing, 8 a.m. on the House side, classified for all lawmakers on this side of the building, and then at 11:30 this morning, all senators got a briefing. In those intervening hours is when we saw these various hearings. And look, there was clear frustration from many of these lawmakers, especially in the public briefings, because they felt that their questions might not be getting full answers, like they weren't getting the transparency that they necessarily wanted. But after the classified briefing is when we heard, on the Democratic side at least, people who sounded frustrated publicly before in the non-classified briefings coming out and saying that they felt they got a better understanding. You know this building well, you know lawmakers well. It's rare that you see lawmakers come out and say, yep, I'm completely satisfied and I feel I have all the information. However, today we did hear at least a handful of Democratic senators saying they felt they had a better handle on this before, and it's the culmination of just a week of clamoring for more information on this, of clamoring for more briefings. Yeah. Now, at least on both sides of the building, they got that, at least in a preliminary sense.
Are we expecting more detailed briefings for the intel committees? Is that going to be more extensive, or is this it for the balloon incident for a while?
I mean, look, you got to imagine that there's probably more to this, maybe not this specific incident, but this is also a Congress where one of the bipartisan actions that they were able to take was creating a select committee focused on China itself. So you have to imagine that this is now going to be one of the focuses folded in, at least under that committee. And then, of course, you have people like Tester and Murkowski who are clearly frustrated because of where they are physically on the map and the role that Alaska and Montana played in this. So, look, it might not be the end of it. This specific balloon, yes, it has been downed. It will now be studied. I'm sure that when we get more information on that, that will also come out. But, China was always going to be a huge focus for this particular Congress. This just gave them a new reason to do it.
No, and it is certainly, at least on this issue, united the elected officials there. Ali Vitale getting us started on Capitol Hill. Ali, thank you. Dan DeLuce, let me start with this basic question here, which I don't think we've gotten answered. And that is, did we know this was a signals intelligence collection operation? And in a minute, I'm going to make you define signals intelligence for the viewers here. But when did we know what this balloon was? And I ask this because did we know this was a spy balloon when it got into our airspace originally in Alaska? And if we didn't, why?
I think these questions are not being answered satisfactorily, at least in public, at the moment. I think if you take the presentation they gave today from the State Department, they definitely knew that it was scooping up phone communications, eavesdropping. It was able to do that once they had those U-2 high-resolution photos. But they saw this as a surveillance balloon from the get-go. They did not see this as a weather balloon. Weather balloons are smaller. They don't have massive payloads on them. And, of course, the U-2 photos drove home the point was, okay, they've got some eavesdropping capacity on here. They've got all these antennas and other kind of spying equipment and solar panels that generate the electricity for that.
Well, let's go to signals intelligence. The last time you hear the word signals intelligence, that's something NSA collects as far as our side is concerned. And there's always nervousness, and the old Edward Snowden release back in the day, and I think some people may remember that phrase. So, signals intelligence when it comes to the Chinese, what does that mean?
Well, it really is pretty simple. If you set aside the jargon, it means they're trying to eavesdrop. And, of course, if you have a satellite, you can't eavesdrop on a conversation at an Air Force base in Montana the way you can with a balloon lingering and loitering overhead. So that's where that's coming from. And, of course, the assumption here also is that balloon had cameras on it and other types of sensors. And then that feeds into a mosaic of information that's being sucked up by satellites and other means. But I think it does then raise this question, why, if there was another balloon previously, a similar balloon, why did they not shoot this down immediately? And why haven't we heard more about this? But Chuck, I think from the administration's point of view, they'll say, listen, we are our hands are tied slightly talking about this because so much of this is classified, and they say they don't want to show their hand so that the Chinese know how we're tracking it.
Dan, that sounds like a fancy explanation for not wanting to admit that the Chinese figured out how to go undetected on a massive surveillance program for a long time.
That is a very reasonable question. I mean, listen, it's one of those things. You know, there was a cruise missile attack on Saudi Arabia a few years back. It involved drones and cruise missiles. And even though Saudi Arabia has all this very fancy, high-end, U.S.-made radar and air defenses, those drones, those low-tech drones, snuck in there, literally below the radar. And this was another case of this kind of really low-tech tool that is hiding in plain sight, and it is sort of embarrassing for them. And they say, well, we're configured to look at missiles and aircraft, and now we're on this. But if you set aside the partisan questions, Chuck, there is this question, is there a gap here in our intelligence and military defenses?
The fact that they've invited the FBI in, I think they're not going to say it. They're showing us. Anyway, Dan DeLuce, our national security reporter here at NBC News. Dan, thank you. And speaking of the FBI, let me bring in Clint Watts, former FBI special agent, NBC News national security analyst, and also Bonnie Glaser, a China expert and managing director of the Indo-Pacific program at the German Marshall Fund. But Clint, I want to dive into the FBI's role here. The fact that the FBI was brought into this, tell me how that doesn't signal that the intel community is essentially starting from ground zero here and trying to figure out what the Chinese were doing.
Maybe, Chuck. I'm not convinced of the same with that. I think the biggest thing is the best evidence response teams in the world are the FBI. And you might remember back to a lot of aircraft crashes that have been off the coast. You might remember aircraft that went down out of, I believe, JFK many years back. The FBI normally leads the gathering of evidence. The second part of that, the reason they do it, is they could be pursuing some sort of criminal charges against whatever the entity is in China if they can pin it to one. Think to lots of the indictments lately coming out of China, Iran, Russia that the FBI has advanced to the Department of Justice. They could be charging a company potentially or some sort of entity, could be the Chinese military to some degree. They might want to build a case on that. At the same point, anytime they can recover evidence of any technological nature, that's great intelligence for them to gather. And I would imagine if they're just becoming aware of these balloons, this may be the first time they can actually get their hands on any of those components. So they're going to really want to focus on getting all the material they can, understanding everything about it, and trying to trace where that manufacturing came from, command and control, what signals or even other types of intelligence was trying to be collected with that Chinese balloon.
Can you give me a sense of the technology here? Is this did this balloon work almost like a cell tower interceptor? Can you give some sense of how the technology worked?
Yeah, I can't know for sure, Chuck, but I would assume that there was a reason they thought they needed to get within communications range such that they could pinpoint signals. Now, it's also a little bit confounding because many satellites that might be deployed could go after signals intelligence too, but for some reason, they needed to fly at a certain altitude or be able to get to certain targets.
Do you have a theory?
In such a way that they could. I would assume that it was going after military communications if I had to put some sort of guess forward right now, both in terms of the path. I mean, the path was all military Air Force bases throughout the country. It seemed like it was tracking on. I think the second part of it is they would want to know communications they couldn't gather by other means, meaning cell towers, cell aggregate, cell data, commercial advertising. Those sorts of things are often available in the private sector, but they're obviously wanting something they couldn't get by other means, which means not by a satellite, not by commercial resources, something probably related to the military or intelligence community.
Is this going to be a failure of imagination by the intel community when all's said and done?
I think in all these cases, Chuck, when you look across the board, the weaknesses really in the modern day are the old sort of like tradecraft issues that we kind of have forgotten about. We become so technologically advanced in our societies. We often don't detect or look for these things that seem like really out of date or very simplistic. And that goes to everything from human spies to, signals intelligence, any sort of intelligence today. We have gone to the highest extreme, drones, autonomous thinking, artificial intelligence. This is very basic 1950s, 60s stuff that they were trying to pull. And it does, open the question, like, are we still looking at every possibility across the intelligence community?
And Clint, what's frustrating is that there's no dramatized version of the CIA out there where the plot line doesn't end up moving in a direction where some old school way of doing something is what breaks it. I mean, the irony is that fictional accounts seem to have imagination sometimes that our actual intel agencies don't. Anyway, I'm not going to belabor that point, but Clint Watts, I really appreciate you explaining what the FBI's role in this is. Bonnie, let me go to the diplomacy side of things with you. Obviously, we spy on China. China spies on us. So the question is how, on one hand, we want to send a message. On the other hand, I'm assuming we don't want to send a message so much that suddenly our access is cut off. What is that line? Walk me through that.
Well, I think that the United States called China immediately when they saw the balloon coming over Alaska. We called in officials from the Chinese embassy. And part of the problem is that in China, the military doesn't talk to the diplomats. So the diplomats we were talking to probably have no idea what...
You believe that? Bonnie, you believe that? I mean, there's a lot of skepticism about that. But Richard Haas also was on here last week with a similar belief that this was a miscommunication in China.
Oh, I think there's lots of evidence in prior instances in which the PLA has not communicated what it's doing to the diplomats in China. There just isn't a lot of communication between the two. But then the Chinese came out with a formal statement saying that it was a weather balloon and it had blown off course. And that was a false statement. And at that point, they may have not known, or they may have been told and they decided to portray it as something that it wasn't. So they did not tell us the truth. And that is a big problem. So it looks like we're exposing a massive surveillance program that I think a lot of people are going to be surprised about. Is this an opportunity here for the U.S. to put together a coalition of countries that have been surveilled, or are we going to find out most of these countries that were surveilled are ones that have military agreements with the United States? Well, certainly some of them have military agreements with the United States, and the U.S. has already briefed over 40 countries and alerted them to what may have taken place in the past or could happen in the future over their countries. And that's important for us to do because we want other countries in the world to understand what China is doing that might be threatening their interests. At the same time, I think we want to resume some dialogue with China, which President Biden met with China's leader, Xi Jinping, at the end of last year. And they decided that they wanted to try and prevent this relationship from continuing to deteriorate. And this incident is certainly causing further deterioration. So we need to have discussions with China, not only about this particular episode, but about how we put in place measures to prevent these things from happening in the future. We need to have secure communications with China that are reliable. Right. Just the other day, we know that Secretary of Defense Austin tried to reach out to China's defense minister, and apparently the answer that came back was, no, thanks, I don't want to have a phone call with you. That's not really acceptable in this kind of a situation.
It does feel like as if I mean, what you're describing, and here, with the Soviets, we had the Open Skies Treaty. After the U-2 incident, it was this acknowledgement, look, we're going to have mutual surveillance in some form, so let's have some sort of code of conduct, I guess, is one way to put it. And we had the so-called red phone. Do you think China do you think these are negotiable items, and should we be going down this road?
Well, I do think that there are lessons we can learn from the Cold War. The Chinese don't want to be portrayed as the Soviet Union. They don't want to be seen as the adversary of the United States. But we should put in place some of these mechanisms with China. It is essential. And the problem here, of course, is that in some areas, the Chinese actually do lag behind the United States. They're working pretty hard right now to increase their nuclear arsenal, for example, both in terms of numbers of warheads and capabilities. And they're not very keen to talk to the United States until they have actually completed this modernization cycle.
Bottom line, is this the Pentagon is trying to say this is not an intelligence failure. How do you not classify this as an intelligence failure?
Well, I think that there probably were some gaps in our air defenses. I don't know all of the details. I've not been read in, but clearly there were balloons that were going over the United States previously. We have evidence they flew over Hawaii, I believe over Guam, and potentially over the continental U.S. And we had senior Trump administration officials say, no, when they were in office, they were not informed about these operations. But apparently, we have looked back at this information and decided, yes, this was going on during the Trump administration. So I don't know whether we need to go so far as to call it an intelligence failure. I guess you'll have to define that quite clearly before we decide whether the answer is yes or no. But there were gaps in our defenses, no doubt.
Bonnie Glaser with the German Marshall Fund, an expert on all things China in the United States. Really appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise with us. Before
Thanks
that, Clint Watts as well. Coming up, I'm going to speak to the ranking member on the House Foreign Affairs Committee about what he learned in today's briefing and what more he'd like to learn. Plus, the earthquake death toll grows to a staggering 20,000, and millions more face internal displacement. The latest on the dire situation in Turkey and Syria ahead. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. As we mentioned, lawmakers pressed the administration for classified briefings on the Chinese spy balloon because there was agreement in Congress that it's the only thing that there's just too little of. Anyway, I'm joined now by Congressman Gregory Meeks. He's the top Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He was part of today's briefing. So, Congressman, let me ask you this. In a briefing of 500-odd members of Congress, 400 plus in the House, as many as 100 in the Senate. I'm not going to assume perfect attendance. How thorough should we have expected that briefing to be, given how many people were being briefed?
Well, I think that we needed to brief as to up to date, minute by minute, what happened, what didn't happen, what should have happened, and what we could do in the future. And this was just for the House members. This was not inclusive of the Senate. And to have each member come up and ask the question that was on his or her minds. And I think that happened today, where we did get the facts from the military, the State Department, and other members of the administration, and have some idea of where we should be going from here.
I want to read you something that Brian Schatz, senator from Hawaii, said. He said, I respect the need to keep some of this classified, but we all understand that some of the desire to keep things classified has to do with not wanting to disclose to the public things that might be inconvenient politically for the department. This was after his briefing, and I know he got the assumption, I would assume, that you guys got the same general briefing. I'm curious if you felt that way after this briefing.
Well, I felt, number one, I know that the administration has declassified a lot of things, as we've seen in the media recently, both from you, Chuck, and the New York Times and the Washington Post. Yeah, there are some gaps, as your prior guest indicated, that we need to focus on to fill those gaps. And so in those classified sessions and some of the sessions that I've had, we're going to be making sure that that happens. But I'm also was satisfied to know that the decision-making process that went in was we learn more now by not taking the balloon down in the beginning, and once we first saw it, and it was assessed not to be a security risk or a danger to the United States or the United States people, that by traveling it and watching it until we got over the Atlantic Ocean, we've learned a lot more about the balloon campaign and the capabilities and what they're after and the technology, quite frankly. So I think that, yes, we got to fix some of those gaps, but we have learned more than we would have known otherwise.
No, and I guess, though, the question is, it turns out there were some balloon intrusions that we didn't know what they were, and now we do. We've gone back in hindsight. Obviously, there's a gap here. What do you you have a sense of that gap? Is it a gap that's too reliant on, you heard we're so into AI and drones, we forget sometimes some old school methods. Is that why this happened in your mind?
Well, no, I think that, and I can't disclose what we discussed in the classified session, but I think that there is ways that we can do better in regards to some other methods. But I also think that it's clear that we need to also work with our friends and allies. Remember that this also came over Canada. And so there should be some more dialogue and conversation with them. Mm-hmm. It's been known now that these balloons have flown over 5 continents. And so we need to work together still collectively with friends and allies who are also very upset with China violating their sovereignty. So there's ways that we can do that also, ways that we can better share information and get information.
Did you get a sense, the surveillance in the other continents, how much of it, was there a pattern to the surveillance? For instance, my first thought would be, did they do this over countries where we have basing agreements with? Meaning, they may have surveilled 40 countries, but was the target really America?
Well, not from the information that I have gathered thus far.
Okay.
I think that they're looking, so that's not the case. I think that it's a general program that they've had, just going over various countries to see what they could see. And I should say in this instance also, they didn't get much information at all. Of course, by tracking it over, we made sure that communications and other sensitive areas that they may have flown was locked down. So there's no question about that. So that's why the determination was to follow it till it got over to the Atlantic Ocean. The president said at the best, he left it to the military and our intelligence to their judgment, their determination to shoot it down at the best and most appropriate time. And I think that was the appropriate thing to do.
Did you, last question, was our folks, were they, and I'm not trying to bait you into saying something that will get twisted in a headline. But was the technology impressive and advanced, or was the technology less impressive than meets the eye? How would you characterize it?
Well, I would characterize it that we know what to do. Just put it that way. We know what to do, and how to do it, and we sent the message to China. I don't think that China thought we would shoot it down, period. There's some delicacies that are going on here. I know you talked with your prior guest about, the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we want to make sure that there's no accidental war that starts because of a mistake. And so those kinds of things are still being worked on.
Congressman Gregory Meeks, he's the ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Always good to get your perspective and expertise. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, Turkey and Syria are in a state of crisis after the world's deadliest earthquake disaster in more than a decade. And the window for finding survivors is closing and closing fast. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. The death toll from this week's earthquake in Turkey and Syria has now topped 20,000. That makes this the deadliest earthquake anywhere since more than 100,000 people were killed in an earthquake in Haiti 13 years ago. New images from the rescue operations are, in a word, gut-wrenching. These are photos of a search and rescue team holding a 2-year-old child who was pulled from the rubble after 44 hours, along with her mother. Emergency crews are still searching desperately for more survivors, but those efforts are being hampered by sub-zero temperatures. Matt Bradley is the latest from Turkey on the ground.
Yeah, Chuck, well, I've been here in Turkey for 3 days now, 3 days, or well more than 3 days, since those twin earthquakes that rocked this region and have now created casualties that have gone well past 20,000. That number is probably going to rise even further. That makes these earthquakes the most deadly earthquakes in this region in generations. And as you can see, even well more than 3 days after this, there's still a frenetic, desperate all day, all night long effort all throughout this city and all throughout southern Turkey and northern Syria, trying to find living people underneath this wreckage. Now, it might sound unlikely, but rescue workers have reason to believe that they can still find people who are alive, even though it's well past the time that most rescue workers say, those first 72 hours that are crucial to finding living victims. Still, just a few hours ago, here in this city, just right down this street, we actually watched as a middle-aged man was taken out of the rubble after more than 80 hours underneath that wreckage. So this is an ordinary man who has really made an extraordinary accomplishment, a feat of endurance that most of us can't really imagine. Now, also today, I saw an American crew, one of some 70 countries that are donating aid and assistance to here in Turkey. Now, this crew is from mostly Los Angeles and Fairfax County, and they brought with them a very important tool, a simple one, a dog. Now, I've been here for 3 days, and I haven't actually seen the Turks using a dog to sniff out for living people on any of these sites, but they say they have them, but just in a much smaller quantity than are normally used in the United States. I asked the USAID head who was leading this delegation about what it was they were doing and how it is that their work is helping the Turks even after 3 days. Here's what he told me. Just really quickly, can you just tell me exactly what you just said? So what did you just see here?
Yeah, so we arrived here because we were called because they had signs of life. So we brought a survey team with a dog and with tools to check it out. When we got here, there was a crew on site, a local crew who was already digging, and they managed to make a hole. It does seem like the person is alive, so they're working to expand the hole and pull that person out. They've asked us to go to a separate site, which is nearby, where they think they have another person who might be alive. So we're going to go scope that out, and if it's the case, then we'll call the heavier crew in to actually do the excavation.
All right, we'll go with you. How unlikely was it to find somebody alive at this point, though?
Very unlikely. It gives a lot of hope because it is quite unlikely, but it does make us hopeful.
Okay. All right, we're going to go follow them.
So these guys are with us. The yellow helmets, obviously.
They're taking care of that.
Yeah, exactly.
65-year-old guy?
Yep.
And he's alive?
He's alive, yep.
Yeah.
They're going to handle that. He had some voices in a pile just around the corner, so we're going to go check that, and then we can go from there.
But I have to also tell you that this USAID head, he gave full credit to the Turks. He said, it's not that the U.S. is necessarily, or any of these other countries are necessarily bringing something to the table that the Turks haven't. In fact, he said that Turkish search and rescue crews are often deployed around the region to other countries themselves to try to do just this kind of work. He said something that is just obvious to anybody who's been here for more than 5 minutes. The authorities here are overwhelmed. This is a crisis that would overwhelm even the most prepared, wealthiest, and best trained emergency forces from any government in the world. It is such a large-scale crisis, and again, well more than 20,000 dead. This is something that has rocked the region and that most people here have never seen in their lifetimes. Chuck.
Matt Bradley, thank you for that reporting. I'm joined now by Sarah Charles, an assistant to the administrator of USAID's Bureau of Humanitarian Assistance. Sarah, you, I think, heard or saw that report from Matt Bradley. I know your colleagues are involved there. It has been hard, I think, to sort of relay the gravity of the situation there. I think Matt did a pretty good job of doing that. Throw in the political strife. I mean, look, the first U.S. convoy was finally able to get in. How hard is it for us to help because of the political situations?
Yes, Chuck, I'm so glad that your viewers were able to see that USAID team in action and still see signs of hope and signs of life. Our number one priority is certainly supporting those urban search and rescue efforts. We have more than 160 personnel on the ground looking for survivors in the rubble. But as you said, we are responding not just on the Turkish side of the border, but we're also very concerned about conditions in Syria. We've just announced $85 million in additional assistance to respond both to the earthquake impacts in Turkey, but also on the Syrian side, where it's been much harder to get assistance in. We have experienced partners that have been working both in opposition-controlled areas of Syria, but also regime-controlled areas of Syria during the years of the war. and have pivoted their assistance now, and we're working with them to scale up that assistance on the Syrian side as well as the Turkish side of the border.
I'm not saying this for some sort of political response, but I'm curious. The Russians have a lot of operations in Syria. Are the Russians being helpful in this?
So I'd certainly say one of our number one asks to the Russians and to the Syrian government right now is we have a number of border crossings on the Turkish side of the border that could be used to get assistance to Syrians that are living in opposition-controlled areas of Syria. Right now, there's only one authorized border crossing that our UN partners can use. They could be getting more assistance to Syrians on the opposition-controlled side of the border if the Russians and the Syrians allowed.
So this was the question I was like, there's still some trust issues, essentially?
I'd say yes, there are still some trust issues.
What about with the Turks? You saw Matt Bradley say that they're overwhelmed. Is that, what can be done? I mean, obviously there needs to be more search and rescue teams, but, can more get there, and who sort of coordinates that?
So I do want to give credit to the Turkish authorities. They have mounted a massive response, but this is a catastrophic event. Their civil protection arm, AFAD, is one of the best in the world at these kind of search and rescue operations. But as our DART team leader said, they're overwhelmed. That's why we're providing not just urban search and rescue support, but also using assets that are at Incirlik Air Force Base to provide lift assistance, given the condition of roads in Turkey, in order to move those search and rescue teams, but also other forms of humanitarian assistance to where it's needed most.
If there is one thing that an American can do, what's the best thing they can do?
I would say the number one thing that Americans can do right now is to give cash assistance to trusted organizations that are working both in Turkey and in Syria. At USAID, we support a website called CIDI.org. That's CIDI.org. That's a landing page that includes links to some of those trusted organizations that are on the ground now, able to respond and able to get assistance where it's needed most.
That's exactly what I was looking for. Where could we go to find some vetted organizations? Sarah Charles with USAID. Really appreciate you coming on and helping us out here. Thank you.
Chuck.
After the break, the look of love was not, what was in President Biden's eyes today as he hit the road in Battleground, Florida, taking his message to the home state of two of his potential top rivals in 2024. And a third that he wants to use as a punching bag. You're watching Meet the Press Now.
The very idea the senator from Florida wants to put Social Security and Medicare in the chopping block every 5 years, I find to be somewhat outrageous. So outrageous that you might not even believe it. But it's what he said. I won't do it again, but I will. 12-point American Rescue Plan. One of the points, all federal legislation sunsets every 5 years.
Welcome back. I was President Biden this afternoon at an event in Florida, continuing to challenge Republicans on entitlement programs. Joining me now, NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, who is with the president in Tampa, though I think the president is just leaving. So, Mike, he went to Florida, where two of his potential 2024 rivals are, and he talked about another Florida man.
Well, if you listen closely, Chuck, though, he did talk about all three. Now, obviously, since the State of the Union address, and really since the midterm election campaign, President Biden has been talking about Rick Scott, been talking about Ron Johnson. The White House really does think that this battle over retirement security programs and health care costs generally is a winning one for them. But the president, after really seizing on Scott in that highest profile setting on Tuesday night, broadened the attack lines out a little bit today. He went into the fact that Republicans like the Speaker of the House, Kevin McCarthy, want to repeal the Inflation Reduction Act, which would lead to no more cap on insulin. It would take away some of the big hard-fought provisions of the Inflation Reduction Act. They also talked about Medicaid expansion. It's been a while since we heard about that issue, Chuck. He noted, and Charlie Crist was here in the audience when he spoke, if Charlie Crist had been elected last year, that Florida would have joined those states that expanded Medicaid. Obviously, Florida and Governor DeSantis have refused to do so. And then he talked about just broadly the debt and deficit challenge that is ahead, one of the big fights of the year here in 2023. And he seized on the fact that his predecessor added more to the debt than most presidents combined before him. And so there was an opportunity for President Biden to sort of cast a wide net, and the DNC, the White House also pointing out other potential rivals in 2024 are all on record in some way, shape, or form wanting to take some aim at these retirement programs, Obamacare, you name it. So this is sort of an early indication of some of the issues the White House, the Biden team thinks could be winning ones for them.
Mike, you're our leading Bidenologist, if you will. He's doing a couple of TV interviews. He doesn't do them a lot. Did one with our friend Judy Woodruff at PBS yesterday. He's got one with our friends at Telemundo today. Look, there's the small, scoopy type of headlines, but from what you took away from the interview, what was the most interesting thing you took away from Biden's sit-down?
Well, he's been, joking at times more and more about his age. We know that the White House team knows this is sort of the big question mark around his 2024 candidacy when they otherwise think he has a lot to run on. And it was interesting to hear him say, for instance, to Judy Woodruff that, he would be forthright with the American people about those questions about age should they come up. That's why, though, the State of the Union address, beyond the policy points that they think they scored ahead of the debt ceiling fight and the like, just the sort of attitude he took into the State of the Union address, the fact that he was folksy and feisty, really, I think the White House helped in a way that words couldn't provide, at least answer some of those questions. And so the president has been saying, and he said it to Judy Woodruff again, that he hasn't made a decision. We know next week, a week from today, the 16th, is an important day. He's going to get a physical. And then I think then sort of all bets are off about the timeline moving forward. Yep.
That's an important piece of the timeline you just added there. Assuming the physical is all good, we could picture how that leads into the actual announcement. Mike Memoli, like I said, you're a leading Bidenologist for a reason. Mike, thank you. We'll be right back. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back, panelists here. Tamara Keith, NPR White House correspondent and co-host of the NPR Politics podcast. Stephanie Shriak, senior advisor for the Strategic Victory Fund. And Michael Steele, former RNC chair and an NBC News political analyst. Well, there's a lot of things we could start with, but I want to start with sort of, and I wonder if it's starting to already lose some steam, and that is the Weaponization Committee, which the White House, and I throw it out here, the White House came out swinging today. They called this, quote, this was in a White House memo. You got it, Tamara.
I did.
The Fox News reboot of the House Un-American Activities Committee with a political stunt that weaponizes Congress to carry out the priorities of extreme MAGA Republicans in Congress. That wasn't Joe Biden's tone at the State of the Union.
But this is a special division of the White House counsel's office that exists to battle with Republicans and Jim Jordan and all of them on this committee and all of the committees doing investigations. And, that memo is in line with everything we know about the White House strategy, which is to make them look like a bunch of kooks from Fox News who are just, going down rabbit holes, while the president can go travel to Florida and talk about things that Americans care about, like the cost of insulin. And they want to sort of keep those universes separated and do hard-hitting stuff from the counsel's office and just let the president be the president.
Stephanie, it does seem like a lesson learned from the Obama years. I don't remember this type of war room for the Benghazi hearings. And there was some existed, but
I was say it existed.
Yeah,
it was definitely there, but they're not messing around. No. They're not messing around. This is, they've got the high ground on. They've just delivered a lot of stuff in the last 2 years, and now it's going out the door. And you're going to see the president, the vice president, the cabinet going out delivering bridges and infrastructure and chip manufacturers, and they're going to talk about the price of insulin, and they're going to talk about protecting Social Security and Medicare while this chaos is going on. And there's the difference right there. Like, we're governing, we're delivering, and they're the party of chaos, and boom, we're just going to call it out.
Michael, there's a fine line here for the White House to walk, and I'm curious what your advice to them would be in this respect. For Jim Jordan, having the hearing is the win.
Yes.
He doesn't care if the findings aren't there.
Right.
And so this is where, the more attention you give it, he's happy.
He's very happy.
So what's the line? Well, how do you push back without giving it attention?
I think the line is exactly what Tamara just laid out. What the White House approach is, when your head comes up, we're gonna smack it. It's a little whack-a-mole with Jim Jordan and the committee. And I think You know, that line, as you know, Chuck, in this town will move, all right? And it's a matter of just how much Jim Jordan and the committee presses and what they press on, how they press, how hard the White House and the counsel's office in particular are going to strike back. So I think this initial, layup by the White House on the heels of the State of the Union is smart. It's like, okay, you want to play? Let's play a little bit, smack you. Okay, what's your next play?
Meanwhile, Tamara, and I think I'm sure you got this. The Scott folks are trying to now lean into this, aren't they? He's trying to make lemonade out of this.
He is.
Has he made any yet?
He had a very difficult interview on CNN where he attempted to say that it was actually the White House that wants to cut Medicare because they are negotiating the price, because there's legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act that allows the negotiation of drug prices to bring down what the government is paying for drugs. It didn't really hold up in that interview that he did on CNN, but it's an argument he is trying to make, in part because, being Joe Biden's favorite punching bag, I mean, Biden goes around to all of these events and he's got look at this, I got the plan right here.
And Scott just seems to walk right into it. He doesn't, he is not deft at this.
And you remember what McConnell said when this came out, this is not the position of the Republican caucus.
Well, I want to come back to this, though. Not many. Mike Pence is owning it. But other than that, I mean, you're old enough to remember when the Republican Party thought that maybe they
should privatize the whole thing.
Right.
Remember that fight? It wasn't that long ago.
Are Republicans really going to run away from this position completely? I mean,
they could. They could.
Because they're running right to Trump if they do it.
They're running right to Trump. Look, that's what was so special about watching what Biden did at the State of the Union. He negotiated Medicaid, Medicare, and Social Security off the table, and Republicans were like, yeah. And so now what are you going to do? Where do you go?
It's astonishing. I got to... in a previous life, you were head of Emily's List.
Yes.
Yeah. The president spent more time on junk fees and resort fees than he did abortion rights. How's the community handling it?
Well, we know where he stands, and I don't think anybody's that concerned about it, to be quite frank. I mean, just because
there was some disappointment, it sounds like, from some.
From some, but the truth is, we know that the Democrats and the leadership are going to be talking about abortion access for another 2 years, and then another 2 years, and another 2 years until we fix the situation. And on top of it, there's court cases coming up that could really, really drive some huge problems, including the one out of Texas on medication abortions. So there's a lot of stuff. We've got legislatures that are pushing bans. Oh yeah, and the House wants a national ban.
No.
I think
there's going
to be a lot of conversation on abortion.
Tamara, what have you, as the White House, how are they spinning their lack of mentions of it?
Their focus was on kitchen table issues. Now, there's a strong argument that abortion is also a kitchen table issue. They made it one in the midterms, and it was successful. But there was definitely a focus on trying to make a broader appeal, to talk about issues that were common sense to all Americans, regardless of their views on some of these hot-button issues. I mean, the big goal of that State of the Union address, the first 3/4 of it, was to be like, hi, I'm so reasonable. Don't you agree with me? And then, goad them into, this back-and-forth shouting match.
All right, we don't have a lot of time. DeSantis versus Trump. The back-and-forth is finally beginning.
That's not even a match.
Well, I say it this way. DeSantis is finally realizing he's got to engage here a little bit. How's he doing so far? You're not impressed?
That's my answer.
You're not.
Come on. He has a glass jaw.
And
prove it to me otherwise.
You think Trump will find it?
He's already found it. He has lobbed these. He's just throwing stuff at it, and he's not responding. I mean, this is literally an opportunity where he can stand up and take command of the moment with Trump. There's no downside, really, to do so. You've got all this wind from your reelection in Florida and your sales.
There's a lot of Republicans that want to protect him.
Want to protect him, so you figure they're all going to. You can't rely on that, Chuck. You know that, because the minute the numbers show that not only is Trump back and engaging, but the base is revved up and ready to rock and roll, where do you think those donors are going to go?
Yeah.
And we've already seen this rodeo. I've been to this rodeo. We were at this rodeo. This was in 2015, 15 and 16. And we saw one great big Jeb Bush, great, huge, amazing establishment Republican
and
that
Trump
was going to be the
didn't have
nominee.
He didn't have a base then.
He didn't have the base.
He didn't have a base
he's got
then.
A base.
I hear you. I'll be watching too. Anyway, Cameron, Stephanie, Michael, thank you. Thank you all for being with us this hour. I'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now continues. Coverage continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.